The rain of metal fell quietly across the burned skies of Grithon 4. War had left the once bright city in ruins. Among the cracked streets and silent towers, a line of armored vehicles rolled forward, their engines humming like distant thunder. Inside, the lead vehicle, Evan Rains, a young human soldier in dark combat armor, sat with his rifle resting across his knees. His helmet was off, showing his sharp eyes and short dark hair. He had been on the front lines before, but this mission was different. There would be no firefight, at least that's what the briefing said. This was a diplomatic escort mission. The E. Two great powers, the United Human Colonies and the Zarathian Empire, had been enemies for decades. But now, with a bigger threat rising in the galaxy, they were trying something new. Peace talks. A royal delegation from the Zarathians was visiting the human-controlled sector, and Evan had been chosen to help escort them through the war-scarred borderlands. Evan didn't think much about politics. He followed orders, but the commander's words before departure had stuck with him. Rains, you're guarding someone important. She's not just a politician, she's the Emperor's daughter. Don't mess this up. The convoy stopped at a half-collapsed landing plaza where the Zarathian shuttle was already waiting. Its silver hull gleamed even under the gray sky, shaped like a bird with wings folded close. As the ramp lowered, Evan stood at attention, his boots pressing against the wet ground. The first to step out were Zarathian guards, tall, slender figures in flowing armor of black and silver. Their skin was smooth, with faint markings like shimmering tattoos across their faces. Their eyes glowed faintly in the shadows, an eerie yet strangely beautiful sight. Then she appeared, Princess Leora. She moved with the grace of someone raised in royal halls, each step measured and light. Her gown-like armor was made of thin plates that curved like petals, and her long hair, a deep silver blue, was tied high, flowing behind her like a banner in the wind. Her eyes were striking, pale gold, almost metallic, scanning the humans. Before her with calm precision. Evan's first thought was that she didn't look like someone from a war empire. She looked delicate. But her posture told a different story. Controlled, perfect, every movement rehearsed. The human commander stepped forward, greeting her in formal words. Leora responded in flawless common tongue, her voice smooth and steady. But when her eyes met Evan's, there was the smallest pause. He wasn't sure if she was sizing him up or simply surprised to see someone his age in the escort team. Either way, her gaze lingered for a second longer than polite before she turned back to the commander. Evan didn't think much of it until a few minutes later when the arrangements changed. Rains, the commander said. You're assigned as her personal shadow until we reach the safe zone. Evan blinked. Her what? Stay close. Don't let her out of your sight. If she wants to move, you move with her. And that's how Evan found himself walking beside the alien princess through the cracked streets, his rifle slung over his shoulder, rain dripping down his armor. Leora kept her head high, pretending the ruined human city didn't bother her. But inside, her heart was beating a little too fast. She had been trained since childhood to remain composed at all times. No emotion should show in public, especially not before foreign soldiers. And yet, this human walking beside her made that training harder than it should be. He didn't move like the stiff ceremonial guards she was used to. The next morning, after the tense meeting, Evan was called into the commander's office on the human side of the border station. Private Rains, the commander said, the situation between our species is heating up. We can't risk the Zarathian princess being caught in crossfire. You're being reassigned. Evan stood straight. Reassigned to where, sir? To her, the commander replied simply. You're going to be her personal escort until she reaches the neutral station. The Zarathians asked for one human guard, and their diplomats decided you'd be the least offensive choice. Evan almost smiled. Least offensive? That's comforting. The commander ignored his joke. You'll be traveling in a small diplomatic transport. Just you, the princess, and a couple of her attendants. Keep her safe, and remember, one wrong move could ruin this treaty. Princess Leora was waiting in the docking bay when Evan arrived. She stood tall in her flowing silver robes, her eyes steady but unreadable. Two attendants flanked her, both looking at Evan with mild suspicion. You again? Leora said softly. Lucky. Me? Evan replied. Looks like we're traveling together. Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she said nothing. Instead, she turned toward the transport ship. It was smaller than Evan expected, more like a long shuttle than a cruiser. Inside, space was tight, a single narrow corridor, a cockpit at the front, and a small lounge with 4 seats. As soon as they were aboard, the ship lifted off. The hum of the engines filled the air. The first few hours passed in silence. Leora sat with perfect posture, reading from a data tablet. Evan leaned back in his seat, watching the stars drift past the viewport. Every now and then, his gaze shifted to her. She didn't fidget, didn't sigh, didn't show any sign of discomfort. But he could tell she was aware of him. Finally, he spoke. So, do you travel often? She looked up slowly. Yes, it is part of my duty. Must get boring. It is necessary, she said, her voice calm. Boredom is irrelevant. Evan chuckled. You sound like a manual. Her lips tightened, but not in anger. More like she was trying not to respond. Perhaps humans find humor in situations where Zarathians see discipline, she said after a pause. Yeah, Evan said, grinning. That sounds about right. Later, when one of her attendants left to check the cockpit, Evan decided to try again. So tell me something, he said. What's the strangest human thing you've seen so far? She hesitated. Greetings. You touch hands. It is unnecessary physical contact. Evan grinned wider. You mean shaking hands? Yes, and the thumbs-up gesture. I still do not understand what that means. He laughed. That one just means good job, like approval. It is strange, she admitted, and for the first time her voice sounded almost curious instead of formal. Hours later, the ship's cockpit alerted them of a small object ahead. The pilot's voice came through the intercom. Unidentified vessel detected. It's just drifting. Evan stood, moving toward the cockpit. Leora followed, though her attendants urged her to stay back. Through the forward window, the object appeared. A battered pirate vessel, its hull scorched and lights flickering. The pilot frowned. Could be abandoned. Could be a trap. Evan kept his voice steady. Then we keep our distance. No heroics. We're just passing through. The pilot nodded, adjusting course. But as they moved past, a faint distress signal crackled through the comms. Leora's brow furrowed. We cannot ignore that. We can, Evan replied. Distress beacons can be bait. Pirates leave them to lure ships in. Her tone was firm. If there are survivors, someone else will find them, he said. My job is to keep you alive, and right now, that means not walking into a trap. For a moment, she looked like she might argue, but then she simply nodded and stepped back. She didn't like his decision, but she accepted it. And that acceptance meant more to Evan than he expected. Later that night, the stars outside the viewport seemed endless. The lounge was quiet except for the hum of the engines. Leora was sitting alone when Evan returned from the cockpit. She glanced at him, then away quickly. You handled that pirate situation well, she said after a moment. Thanks, Evan replied. Didn't think you'd agree with me. I still do not, she said softly. But I see your reasoning, and I appreciate your decisiveness. Evan smirked. I'll take that as a compliment. She gave him a faint look, almost a smile, but gone too quickly to be certain. The next day brought a surprise. The ship's sensors picked up another vessel following them. This one was active, running without broadcasting identification. Evan immediately took a defensive position near the princess. "If anything happens, you get to the escape pod," he told her. Her voice stayed calm, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of tension. "And you? I'll make sure they don't get near you." The ship increased speed, but the trailing vessel matched their pace for a while before suddenly changing direction and vanishing into a warp jump. When it was over, Evan noticed Leora's hands were clenched in her lap, the first time he'd seen her composure truly falter. "Hey," he said quietly, crouching beside her seat. "We're fine. That wasn't an attack. Just someone curious about our ship." She exhaled slowly, her fingers loosening. "It is not fear," she said, as though convincing herself. "It is focus." Evan smiled faintly. "Whatever you say, Princess." That evening, as they prepared for rest, Leora surprised him. She walked into the lounge where he was checking his sidearm and said, "I wish to ask you something." "Go ahead." "Why do you speak so freely with me? My attendants tell me that humans should show more distance to royalty." Evan shrugged. "Because you're a person. Doesn't matter if you're royalty or not. I'm not here to bow and scrape. I'm here to keep you alive. Talking helps with that." She studied him for a long moment. "You are unusual." "I get that a lot," he said, grinning. For the first time, she didn't look away. Her eyes held his, calm but curious. And in that small ship, somewhere between two empires, the air felt just a little different. Not warmer exactly, but less cold. By the time they reached the halfway point to the neutral station, something had changed. The conversations were still brief but no longer stiff. The silences between them were no longer heavy. Leora still sat with perfect posture. Evan still leaned back like nothing could bother him. But when their eyes met, there was something new there, an understanding neither of them would admit aloud. The journey was far from over, but already the princess's mask had begun to show its first tiny cracks. And Evan, he was starting to wonder what she'd look like without it at all. The small diplomatic transport glided through the black stretch of space, its engines humming steadily. Inside, the lights were dim, set to a soft glow to match Zorathian preference during night hours. Evan was on night watch. He sat in the lounge, with his rifle resting across his knees, eyes scanning the quiet corridor that led to the cockpit. It had been 2 days since the strange vessel had followed them and vanished, but he wasn't relaxing yet. The lounge door slid open. Princess Leora stepped in wearing a simple dark robe instead of her ceremonial silver. Her hair, usually arranged in a perfect crown-like style, hung loose around her shoulders. "You should be resting," Evan said quietly. "I could not sleep," she replied, moving to the viewport. The stars reflected in her eyes. For a moment, they stood in silence. Evan watched her gaze the galaxy as though trying to read something hidden among the constellations. Then she spoke, her voice lower than usual. "I do not like space travel," she admitted. Evan blinked. "That's unexpected, considering you're a princess of a spacefaring empire." "I am aware of the irony," she said, lips tightening. "When I was younger, I was aboard a diplomatic ship with my parents. A navigation error took us through a debris field. The hull was breached in several places. We barely survived." Evan leaned back in his chair. "That explains a lot. I learned to hide it," she continued. "My people expect calm, confidence. Fear is unacceptable." "Fear's normal," Evan said. "Means you're aware of the danger. The trick is not letting it control you." She looked at him for a moment, then turned back to the stars. "You speak as if it is simple." "It's not simple," he said, "but it's possible." The intercom buzzed suddenly, making them both look up. The pilot's voice came through, tense. Evan? We've got a systems warning. Power fluctuation in the engine core. Evan was on his feet instantly. I'm coming. He looked at Leora. Stay here. Her chin lifted slightly. I will come with you. I said, I'm not hiding, she said firmly. Evan sighed. Fine. Stay behind me. In the engine bay, the lights flickered. The air smelled faintly of ozone. One of the attendants was already there, examining a control panel. What's going on? Evan asked. The attendant's voice was shaky. Power output dropped for a moment, then spiked. Could be a malfunction. Or sabotage. Evan's hand tightened on his rifle. Show me the core. They moved to the sealed chamber that housed the ship's main reactor. At first glance, nothing looked out of place, but then Evan spotted it. A thin black device, barely larger than a credit chip, attached to one of the coolant lines. That doesn't belong there, he said flatly. Leora stepped closer. What is it? A disruptor. It forces the system to overheat. Could cause a meltdown if left long enough. Her eyes narrowed. Who would dare? Evan interrupted. The real question is how it got there. This section's locked. Only the crew and attendants have access. They all exchanged uneasy glances. Evan removed the device carefully, deactivating it before it could trigger again. Someone's trying to make it look like an accident, he said. And that someone is still on this ship. Leora's composure was tested right there. Her jaw tightened, and her fingers curled slightly at her side. Not a full show of anger, but close. This is a diplomatic mission, she said. If it fails, war could return. Exactly, Evan replied, which means our saboteur wants chaos. That night, Evan set up a rotation. The cockpit was locked down, and the engine bay was sealed under his personal code. Still, tension filled the air. When it was Leora's turn to rest, she didn't. Instead, she found herself in the lounge again, where Evan was cleaning his rifle. You think it's one of my attendants? She said quietly. I think we can't rule anyone out, he said. Could be the pilot, could be the crew, could be your people, could be mine. She hesitated. Do you trust me? Evan met her gaze. Yeah. Do you trust me? Her lips pressed together for a moment. I am beginning to. The next day, the saboteur struck again. Only this time, they weren't subtle. The lights cut out completely for 3 seconds. Emergency power kicked in, bathing the corridors in red light. Alarms blared. Evan bolted toward the cockpit. Leora, right behind him despite his shouted warning. They arrived to find the pilot unconscious at his station, a thin scorch mark on his uniform where a stun charge had hit him. The ship was drifting. Evan quickly scanned the controls. Navigation's offline. Someone ripped out the main interface. Can you repair it? Leora asked. I can patch it enough to get us moving, but a noise behind them made him spin. One of the attendants, the same one from the engine bay, stood in the doorway, holding a small blaster. Step away from the controls, the attendant ordered. Leora's voice turned cold. You dare raise a weapon against me? This mission's a mistake, the attendant snapped. Our empire can't trust humans. This treaty will ruin us. I'm making sure it never happens. Evan kept his voice calm. You're making sure a lot of people die, including yourself. The attendant's hand shook slightly. Move away! Evan took a slow step forward, keeping himself between Leora and the weapon. Here's the thing about humans, he said. We don't do well with threats, and we're not easy to stop. The attendant's eyes darted toward Leora for a moment, just enough for Evan to lunge. He grabbed the blaster, twisted it away, and slammed the man against the wall. Within minutes, the attacker was restrained in a storage compartment. The pilot began to recover, groaning, and Evan helped him back into the seat. Leora stood nearby, her expression unreadable, except for her eyes. Her usual calm was there, but something else, too. Relief. You could have been shot, she said. quietly when they were alone. "Yeah," Evan replied, "but I wasn't, and neither were you." For a second, she looked like she might speak again, but instead she simply gave a small nod. That night they sat together in the lounge again. Leora's posture was as straight as ever, but her voice was softer. "When I was younger, I was told humans are impulsive, reckless, quick to anger." "And?" Evan asked. "And now," she said slowly, "I think perhaps they are also quick to protect." Evan gave a half smile. "We try." She turned her gaze back to the stars. "I am beginning to see there is more than one kind of strength." For the first time, Evan thought she might actually be letting her guard down. Not by accident, but by choice. The captured attendant sat in the small storage compartment, bound and silent. Evan had checked the restraints 3 times, not because he doubted his work, but because he doubted how far the man's allies might go. Even with the saboteur caught, Evan's instincts screamed that the threat wasn't over. He had been a soldier long enough to know that one traitor rarely acted alone. Princess Leora seemed to sense it too. She stood in the narrow corridor, her silver robe replaced with a simpler travel outfit. Her gaze was sharp. "You believe there are more," she said quietly. "I'd bet my pay on it," Evan replied, "and we can't just wait for them to make the next move." Her chin lifted slightly. "What do you propose?" "A trap," he said simply. "We make them think they have another chance." They gathered in the lounge to discuss the plan: Evan, Leora, the pilot, and her one remaining loyal attendant. "We'll broadcast a false report," Evan explained. "Say the princess is resting in the lounge without an armed guard. We'll dim the lights, make it look like a perfect chance. Then we wait." The pilot frowned. "You think they'll try again so soon?" "If they think their first man failed, yes," Evan said. "And this time we'll be ready." Leora crossed her arms. "You are certain this will work?" Evan met her eyes. "Not certain, but it's our best shot." After a moment, she nodded. "Then let us do it." That evening, the ship was eerily quiet. The lights were low, and the lounge was staged to look like a careless resting spot. Leora sat in one of the seats, a soft light casting a faint glow on her face. She played her part well, appearing relaxed, even distracted, as she pretended to read a data tablet. What the attackers wouldn't know was that Evan was just a few meters away, hidden in the shadows near the corridor entrance, rifle in hand. The pilot monitored security feeds from the cockpit, his voice ready to alert them at the first sign of movement. Minutes passed. Then an hour. At last, the pilot's voice crackled in Evan's earpiece. "Movement! Corridor 3! Someone's heading for the lounge." Evan's grip on the rifle tightened. From the darkness, a figure emerged, tall, cloaked in a utility jumpsuit. The face was hidden under a hood. The figure moved silently toward Leora, who did not look up. Evan stepped forward. "Stop right there." The hooded figure froze for a heartbeat, then spun, pulling a small plasma knife from a belt. Evan lunged. The attacker slashed, the blade grazing his sleeve, but he caught the man's wrist, twisting hard. The weapon clattered to the floor. The hood fell back, revealing the ship's pilot. "You?" Leora's voice was calm, but her eyes burned with disbelief. The pilot sneered. "You think your peace treaty will save anyone? You're a fool. Humans can't be trusted. This alliance will only lead to war, and I won't let it happen." Evan shoved him toward the wall, pinning him there. "You were the one following us in that second ship, weren't you?" The pilot gave no answer, but his silence told them everything. Leora stepped closer, her expression hard. "You have endangered not only me, but your own people." "Why?" The pilot's gaze flicked to her. "Because you will never see humans the way they really are." Evan's jaw tightened. "Funny. I've been hearing the same thing about your people." They restrained the pilot and locked him in the same compartment as the first saboteur. The ship was now down to just Evan, Leora, and the loyal attendant for security, not a comforting thought on the long journey ahead. In the quiet that followed, Leora walked with Evan to the lounge. She didn't speak for a while, simply standing by the viewport. Finally, she said, "You knew it might be the pilot, didn't you?" "I suspected," Evan admitted. "But I couldn't risk tipping him off. We needed him to try." She studied him. "You take great risks." "Yeah," he said, leaning against the wall. "But sometimes you have to, if you want to protect something." Her voice softened. "Or someone." The next day, the transport passed through a narrow trade corridor, a stretch of space known for pirates and smugglers. They had no choice. Taking the longer route would mean arriving late for the summit. Evan stayed on edge the entire time. Leora noticed, and instead of hiding in her quarters, she stayed near him. "You are tense," she observed. "It's a dangerous route," he said. "If we get hit now with no real crew, it'll be a problem." "Then perhaps I should help," she said. He gave her a look. "Help how?" Her eyes glinted faintly. "You forget, human. I am trained in more than diplomacy. My people expect their leaders to defend themselves." Evan raised a brow. "You're telling me you can fight?" Her lips curved slightly. "I am telling you I will not hide behind you." That claim was tested sooner than either of them expected. An hour later, the ship's sensors beeped. 3 small vessels closing in fast. No identification, no hails. "Pirates," Evan muttered. He grabbed his rifle. "They'll try to board us." "Stay behind me." "I said I will not hide," she interrupted firmly. The ship rocked as the first vessel fired a warning shot across the bow. The loyal attendant took the controls while Evan and Leora prepared near the airlock, the boarding. Attempt came quickly. A clang as the pirate vessel latched onto their hull, followed by the hiss of the airlock opening. The first pirate through the hatch didn't expect resistance. Evan dropped him with a quick strike to the helmet. The second raised a weapon, but Leora moved with surprising speed, grabbing his wrist and twisting it until he dropped the blaster. She kicked it away, her movements sharp and controlled. Evan blinked. "Remind me never to underestimate you." "Noted," she replied, her voice calm despite the chaos. 2 more pirates rushed in, but the confined space worked against them. Evan and Leora fought side by side, his strikes heavy and fast, hers precise and efficient. Within minutes, the Yadi pirates were retreating back into their ship, the boarding clamp disengaging. When it was over, Evan leaned against the wall, catching his breath. "You fight better than some soldiers I know." Leora smoothed her robe, barely winded. "We all have our strengths, human." For the first time, she looked almost relaxed in his presence. Not because she was hiding her feelings, but because she didn't seem to feel the need to. "You didn't have to stand your ground like that," he said. "You could have stayed, safe." She met his gaze. "Perhaps. But if I cannot face danger beside you, then I am not worthy of the peace I seek for my people." Evan didn't have an answer for that. But he knew one thing. The cracks in her mask weren't weakness. They were strength of a different kind. That night, as they resumed their journey, Leora allowed herself something she hadn't done in a long time, a quiet laugh at one of Evan's offhand comments. It was small, barely more than a breath, but genuine. Evan glanced at her, surprised. Was that a laugh? She straightened her posture instantly. No, but there was a faint spark in her eyes that said otherwise. The neutral station came into view like a shining wheel against the dark void. After days of tension, narrow escapes, and betrayals, Evan finally felt a small drop of relief. They had made it this far. Princess Leora stood beside him at the viewport, her posture straight as always, but her eyes fixed on the approaching station. Her silver robe was freshly pressed, her hair perfectly arranged again. From the outside, she looked every inch the untouchable royal figure she had been when he first met her. But Evan had seen the other side of her now, The woman who could fight pirates, face traitors, and laugh at bad jokes. You ready for this? He asked quietly. I was born ready, she said, then glanced at him. But I am glad you are here. It wasn't much, but from her it meant a lot. Docking procedures were slow. The station's guards checked every clearance code, twice. With the sabotage attempts fresh in his mind, Evan didn't complain. The more careful, the better. When they finally stepped into the station's main hall, the air felt different. Not the recycled quiet of the transport, but alive with voices, footsteps, and distant music. Representatives from both the Human Coalition and the Zarathian Empire stood waiting near the summit chamber. Among them were high-ranking officers, diplomats, and the press. Evan took his place just behind Leora's right shoulder, scanning the crowd. His rifle was gone, station protocol, but his eyes stayed sharp. The summit began smoothly. Leora delivered her opening speech in perfect, measured tones. The human ambassador responded with equal courtesy. Cameras flashed, recording every word. For a while, Evan let himself believe it might actually end without incident. Then he saw him, a man in a dark jacket, standing too close to the service door, at the side of the chamber. His gaze wasn't on the speeches, it was fixed on Leora, and his hand was inside his coat. Evan didn't think. He moved. The attacker pulled a weapon, small but deadly enough in close range. Shouts erupted as the man lunged forward. Evan reached him first, slamming into him with enough force to knock the weapon free. They hit the floor hard, the impact sending pain up Evan's side. The man fought back, landing a strike against Evan's ribs, but Evan twisted, using his weight to pin the attacker's arm. The station guards rushed in, dragging the man away. Evan sat back, breathing hard, and then noticed the warm, sharp pain spreading across his shoulder. The attacker's blade, hidden until the last moment, had found its mark. Leora was suddenly there, kneeling beside him. Her usual calm was gone. Her eyes were wide, her hands firm but shaking slightly as she pressed against the wound. "Stay still," she ordered. "You're breaking protocol, Princess," he muttered with a weak grin. "Protocol can burn," she snapped. Station medics hurried over, but Leora didn't move until they had Evan on a stretcher. She stayed by his side all the way to the med bay, ignoring the murmurs of shock from both human and Zarathian officials. Hours later, Evan woke to the soft hum of the med bay's machines. His shoulder was wrapped, the pain dulled by medication. Leora was sitting beside his bed. Her robe was slightly wrinkled, a rare sight, and her hair had loosened from its perfect style. "You're still here?" he asked. She met his gaze. "Yes. I told them the summit could wait." "You didn't have to." "I did," she interrupted, "because I would not be standing in that hall if you had not acted." For a moment, silence filled the space between them. Then she said, "I have always believed composure meant hiding one's emotions. Today, I learned it can mean showing them when they matter most." The next day, the summit resumed. Leora stood before the assembly once more, but this time, her voice carried a different weight. "Yesterday," she began, "an attempt was made to silence this meeting before it could begin. It failed because of one human." She turned slightly, and though Evan was seated quietly at the back, all eyes followed her gesture. "I am told that humans value honesty," she continued. "So let me be honest. I came here believing my duty was to remain untouchable, unshaken. But I have learned that strength is not the absence of fear or feeling. Strength is standing in the open, knowing you could be struck and refusing to step back." There was a long moment of stillness before the chamber erupted in applause. When it was over, Evan waited by the docking bay as Leora approached. "You know," he said, "for someone who didn't like humans much at first, you gave me a pretty, generous speech." Her lips curved faintly. Do not let it go to your head. They walked side by side down the corridor. Her stride was still regal, her posture perfect, but her smile was warm, and this time, she didn't hide it. By the way, Evan said casually, does this mean you'll stop trying to pretend I don't make you laugh? She gave him a sideways glance. No. But I might stop pretending I do not trust you. And as they stepped onto the transport that would take them home, Evan knew that the princess who had once struggled to remain composed now carried herself with a new kind of calm, one that came from choosing when to let the mask fall.